It's mud season, otherwise known as equipment maintenance season, and there is definitely some stuff to address on the Ford 1700 tractor. This is trouble. This machine gets worked really hard, and I hit some wood just wrong last summer, and it wedged in here and separated and bent this retainer plate on the dust seal for the Kingpin on the left side of the tractor. This needs to be addressed. So the first thing we need to do is loosen these wheel bolts. Then we'll jack up and support the tractor, take the wheel off, and then take a look at how to get in there to that seal on the Kingpins. All right, let's jack her up. I have the service manual on this tractor, and believe it or not, this is supposed to be a 300-hour service. I doubt it's ever been changed on this machine, but here's what you have inside. There's a retainer plate, then you've got the rubber gasket or seal, then a piece of felt, then an inner plate, all of that around this ball joint. So in order to get the new rubber seal and felt in there, you actually have to take all of this, and this is actually a gearbox for the four-wheel drive with the final reduction. This needs to be removed. This is going to be a pretty substantial task just to replace this seal. And here's how this gearbox, so here's your gearbox right here. This is wrapping around that ball joint. You can see my hand against it to get a sense of the size. I am a bit nervous about getting this off. I'm going to start with just taking off this inner retainer here, which is holding in that rubber dust seal. A lot on this tractor is metric. This is no exception. These are 13 millimeters. On the 1700, there are actually two plates here. The split's right there. So we got 4 bolts on the bottom one, 4 bolts on the top. Okay, so we got the cover off. Here's the bottom retainer plate, the one that is bent. I don't think there's any way to bend that back, so I did order another one. You can see this is the bottom edge. You can see that water has somehow accumulated and allowed this to rust over the past 41 years, whereas the top one is still perfectly clean. So this piece is just fine. As we look at the seal, this is the felt. Some of the felt stayed stuck to this hub, and some also stayed stuck to this rubber seal. You can see the rust against the rubber. I don't know if this has ever been off, but this is in pretty tough shape. I don't know if you can see the split in the edge right here. This is where the seam was. So definitely in rough shape. Next, I'll go ahead and undo this link, which ties this side, which is connected to the steering unit, to the other side of the tractor. So we'll undo that, and then this entire piece is attached to the bottom Kingpin, so then I can undo those bolts and drop that out, and then the top Kingpin will follow. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about what's going on here. Just for reference, 17 millimeter nut there and 19 millimeter bolt heads for the Kingpins. All right, so here is the inner metal plate of the seal. This I soaked in some diesel fuel to clean that up. Then you've got the felt and the rubber there. Those are totally shot. Now, coming over here, this is what's inside. So there's the drive shaft coming from the differential that connects through a coupling. This is the coupling that connects the shafts together. This thing is pretty neat because it lets it turn any and all directions. And I can't really push it with my finger, but there we go. See that? It pivots on both sides all over the place. So pretty cool little coupling. The issue we have here is it turns out these bushings are all shot too. So if I get this Kingpin up here, we can move all over the place. You may have even be able to see some of that as I was trying to take it apart. It was kind of jiggling all over the place. Same issue on the bottom. This is what is left of the thrust bearing at the bottom. So that is completely torn up. And then as we look at the gearbox over here, that's the shaft going into the final reduction gear, which then goes out to the wheel. So this is the inside of the other part of the housing. No bushings or anything in here. That thrust bearing just goes on the inside here at the bottom. You'll notice there is a locator pin there to align this. There's one of these for both the bottom Kingpin and the top Kingpin. And you can see the rust here around where that rubber dust seal goes. So I'm going to keep working on cleaning this up, and when this does go back together, I will grease the whole inside of it. But the big issue is I need to get these bushings. So I actually need to order some more parts. So what started out as working on replacing the dust seal on the left side of the tractor has turned into a bit of a saga. Once I discovered the bushings and the thrust bearing were shot on that left side, I decided to go ahead and tear down the right side and see what condition that was in, because if I was going to be ordering parts, I figured I just may as well get everything at once and take care of it. So went ahead and tore down the right side, and everything was fine other than the dust seal around that ball joint. I had a dust seal that I had ordered, the parts, the felt and the rubber, so I figured I'd put it together with that. Turns out, taking it apart is the easy part. I spent 5 hours trying to get that gear case back on there with this coupling connecting the two shafts. It was not an easy task. I learned a few things along the way, and I plan to implement those when I go to put the left side back together once the parts come in. What makes this difficult is you have to manhandle this gear case, which is cast iron. This whole thing probably weighs somewhere close to 100 pounds. And then the coupling is basically a CV joint. So this allows for full rotation on this shaft and the other shaft, and the two shafts have splined ends. So you end up setting this on one end, and then you've got to actually hope that it stays straight instead of flopping around as you're moving the gear case. And then you've got to get that lined up and get the splines lined up so that it can slide on to the other end. It's just not an easy thing to do, and it makes changing the dust seals, which requires taking this off, very difficult. So not something you like to see for something that's supposed to be a 300-hour maintenance item in changing that dust seal. I did get this housing cleaned up nice. The other one was not quite as bad, but I did the same thing on that one too. I took a wire brush to this on my drill and just cleaned all the rust off of this surface. I kept it so the drill was spinning such that the debris was thrown out, but I did then clean up the whole inside of here with some degreaser and got that all cleaned. All right, parts have arrived. I've checked it out, and what I got is good and all the right size and everything. So time to get these old bushings out of here. I don't have a bushing punch or anything, so I'm just going to take a metal blade in the Sawzall and just try to get this broken and then collapse it on itself to pull it out. Same thing down in the bottom. I'll probably work from underneath. This box represents about $340 worth of parts. This is the rubber dust seal. That is the felt ring. Those two things together are about $180. Then we have the thrust bearing in this package. So it's actually 3 pieces. And then we have the 2 bushings here for the Kingpins. So altogether about $340. Each of these was like, one was 20, one was 40, and the bearing assembly was about 75 bucks. So these parts aren't cheap, but this is what you need in order to redo that. I thought I was just going to be able to get away with the dust seal, which is what I put on the other side, and doing that is just under $200 for the felt and the rubber, which to me seems awfully steep. Those original bushings did have a slit in them. I wouldn't have needed to cut them with the Sawzall, except that I couldn't see where the slit was located, and I couldn't necessarily get a screwdriver or anything in there to pry or take advantage of that separation in the bushing. I did bugger the inside of the housing a little bit with the screwdriver or the Sawzall, but that's nothing that a little sanding on the inside didn't kind of smooth out. There is still a little bit of a gouge from the Sawzall in just one spot on the bottom, but it won't be a big deal. The new bushing will go in, kind of bridge over that. So the next step is to put the new bushings in. For that, I've got a hardwood block and a mallet. Right now the bushings are in the freezer, and I'm going to heat up the hub a little bit to try and get that temperature differential for expansion and contraction to make it a little easier to put the new ones in. Now that these bushings are in, I need to put this bearing together. It consists of 2 washers and the bearing. I'm going to grease it up and set it on the lower Kingpin, and then the lower Kingpin will be ready to go, and I'll grease the upper Kingpin as well, so that's ready to go. Now that the Kingpins are set, I'm going to coat the inside of this with grease and the inside of this with a protective layer of grease. I'm also going to pack grease into the coupling that connects these 2 shafts together. Once all of that is loaded up with grease, we'll be ready to try and get this gear case and hub mounted back to the axle. Before you get too excited with putting the gear case back on, you've got to put your dust seal components on over this ball so that they're on the axle ready to go. You got to get them in the right order. So the outermost piece is that rubber. The next thing that goes on is the piece of felt Let me stretch that over. And then the final piece that needs to go on is this inner metal ring. So that inner metal ring goes against the hub. So we get all those on here ready to go. And then we're ready to actually put that gearbox back on. What I learned doing the other one is you have got to block this thing up because it's just so heavy and hard to work with. Once you have it blocked up, the next thing I learned is that it's better to have the coupling on the gearbox side than it is to have it on the axle side. The reason for that is you can actually get your eye over this opening, and that's the shaft right there. So if you have the coupling over here, you can actually kind of look down through and see if you're coming on to the shaft straight. Now I can already tell that this one's going to be a pain because the coupling has not stayed straight or held in position. I'll try it and see how it goes. So given how this coupler is so flexible, what I decided to try is actually looping a string around the coupler inside there. It's on a double wrap. Then it feeds up through the ball and then out here, which is the Kingpin hole. I'm hoping that as I slide this in, this string will let me hold that coupler up so that I can try to slide on. It's not going to help me side to side very much, but at least it'll help me up and down get some control as I slide in. So hopefully that'll work. All right, well, this is the hard part done. Next thing I'm going to do is pack grease all in there in that gap all the way around so that this ring can come and sit against it. I'm also going to pack grease all into that felt. Then you just pull this together and tuck the felt in there on top of this. Rubber comes on top, those two plates go on, and you tighten it up.
The Ford tractor axle is now all back together. I did have a little trouble putting that final reduction gear case back on. My string method had some kinks to it. I had first tried the double wrap and then threading it through both holes for the Kingpin. I ended up scrapping that. You can't really see this in the footage, but what I did is I just ran the string with a single loop around the coupler up out the hole in the final reduction housing at the top of the final reduction housing. And then I took the string and I looped it around the locator pin for the upper Kingpin. And what that did is then I didn't have to hold the string. It was holding itself and it was holding that coupler up in the horizontal position. The other thing is because there was a little tension on the string, it also stabilized it a little bit side to side. That made all the difference in the world in being able to slip that coupler on while holding and kind of manipulating that gear case into place. Once it goes on, there is a small gap between that outer housing and the inner ball on the end of the axle, so I could just slip the string out, even though it was kind of then folded over and just in this little gap between the two. So that ended up working. If I did this again, that's what I would do. I would use a string, I would loop it around the coupler up out the hole to hold that coupler straight so that I have that ability to work it onto that inner shaft. So a little bit of a tricky maintenance item, But I'm glad it's done. Both sides are done. Dust seals on both sides. Plus we got the bushings and the thrust bearing on that left side sorted out. So should be good to go with that front axle for a while.